is working.
Further, I think good. Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, at least by the daylight, it's 6 p.m., but it's still shiny and bright. So today we are going to switch to another more practical side of Judaism. Judaism has things that are very spiritual, has things that are very intellectual, like our history and culture, and it also has things that are very tactile, very physical, like food that we've talked about, like Passover we're going to be doing a little bit next week, and today, Tallit and Tefillin. Now, Tallit and Tefillin are things that we actually wear as part of fulfilling the commandments of Judaism. And as such, we have some visual aids. So I'll go through what these things are and how we do them and why we do them. Because as important as it is to wear them, it's also important to know why we are wearing them. Work well? Yes. Okay, so we will go through. So the first place that we or not the first place, the place where we most commonly will remind ourselves of some of these commandments is in what we call the Shema and the Ve'ahavta. You'll find this in the morning service and in the evening service, weekday as well as Shabbat. And the Shema and the Ve'ahavta begins with a phrase that is very familiar to most people. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, or the Lord is one. And then it continues, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Take to heart these instructions which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them serve as a symbol on your foreheads, or literally between your eyes. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now that second half is the mezuzah, which we will cover later, which is the little box you'll see on the doorposts of Jewish homes. But binding them on your hand and as a symbol before your eyes. What does that mean, right? How do we take God's commandments and bind them to our hand and have them on our forehead? Well, the way we do that, according to Jewish tradition, is with tefillin. That is to say, we wear something that physically does this. But as you can see, it is rooted in these words of Deuteronomy.
Are they talking about all 613 commandments in the tefillin?
We're going to go into exactly what's in the tefillin a little bit later. But the idea that we're supposed to have something is at least established with this, which is reinforced in the section that comes a little later in Deuteronomy, but in our prayer book comes as the next paragraph. The Shema and the Ve'ahavta has three main paragraphs as part of our service. The first one was the Ve'ahavta we just did. The next one is often referred to by its first few words, V'haya im shemoa, and if you will listen. And near the end of that paragraph, it says, therefore, impress these words upon your very heart. Sounds familiar. Bind them as a sign in your hand and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. And teach them to your children, reciting them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Inscribe them on the door. This should sound really, really familiar, right? Mm-hmm. This is a repetition to show that this commandment is exceedingly important in Judaism. And then, of course, in the third paragraph of the Shema, we get Vayomer, where it says, and this is taken from the book of Numbers, the Lord said to Moses as follows, speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments. Throughout the ages, let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall the commandments of the Lord and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and your eyes in your lustful urge. Thus shall you be reminded to observe all my commandments and be holy to your God. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, the Lord, your God. And from Numbers 15, and then repeated again in Deuteronomy 22, you shall make fringes on the corners of your garments with which you cover yourself. Okay. So the basic idea that we need to be wearing fringes on corners and that we need to be binding something on arm and head, that's at least established in the Torah. But the Torah doesn't come with illustrations. Right? It would be a very much longer book if there were pictures of everything. So instead, we have to rely on very careful textual analysis and the tradition that has been passed from one generation to the next to know what exactly needs fringes, what exactly does binding it look like, how does this work? And that's what we're going to go into more detail. But I wanted to make sure you understood that it is rooted in the Torah quite clearly. Good? Good. So you may have noticed a little mention of something called a thread of blue. Now, if you go into the lobby and you look at the tallits that are hanging on the rack, you'll notice that the fringes that are hanging from the four corners of each of those are all white. But if you look at my tallit as I walk around, you'll notice that there is a thread of blue. What's going on? Well, this thread of blue is what's called Tallit. Tallit is a particular color of blue, and Tallit comes in a rather interesting way. Tallit comes from a snail, a sea snail. It lives in the Mediterranean Ocean, and there's a little ink pack in it, and you take that out, and with a very special way of preparing it, you end up with blue. If you prepare it a little differently, you get purple. It's rather fascinating. I visited the workshop where they make this in Israel when I was there for 15 years ago. Getting long ago that we were there. But as Rambam points out, the mitzvah of a tallit contains two commandments. One is to make the fringe, and the other is to wind a strand of techelet around it. So for a very long time, we only had white, as the Midrash says, right? Techelet has been hidden. So what happens? Well, what happens is, in Jewish history, is that the people who made techelet, the craftsmen who made this particular dye, they had a closely guarded secret of how to make this. In fact, this dye was so special, not just for the blue, but also for purple, that when the Roman Empire came in, they began to monopolize the manufacture, and it almost became like a state industry owned by the empire, because purple was a color that only the royal Roman family could wear. And so therefore, they did not want this snail juice being used too much, even if the blue was allowed. That meant the price of the blue kept going up and up and up and up, right? It's like printer ink nowadays. It was way too expensive for each drop of the blue. And that created the problem of counterfeits. Because I'm guessing that most of you, if I hold this up, you cannot say, that's snail juice, right? You have no idea. And if you were to put this under a microscope, you also wouldn't be able to differentiate that dye color from other blues that are formed chemically identically to this, but from vegetable matter. So this was a big problem. And that means that the rabbis tried to tell people, it is better not to have the wrong blue. Sorry, it's better to have no blue than to have the wrong blue. And so it actually eventually died out because of the price and because of the counterfeiting. Eventually the community stopped using it. And then as the Roman Empire collapsed and the industry collapsed, nobody knew how to make it anymore. Now, you might think, but it's snail juice. How hard can it be? Well, first of all, the snail juice is not blue. When you take the ink out of this murex snail, it is almost like a clearish sort of liquid. And when you mix it, is where the color begins to come out. And for many, many, many hundreds of years, people thought this was the right snail. But they weren't sure because, of course, we didn't have anybody who had been making it for the last 2,000 years. And we couldn't quite get blue. Every time they tried to mix it, they kept getting purple. But there's a trick, and this is what was discovered in the middle of the 20th century, which is if you prepare the ingredients, if you prepare the dye outside, and you expose it to UV light, it goes blue. If you do it indoors, it goes purple, right? The UV light is what shifts one to the other. And so this was a moment of rediscovery of how to make techelet, how to make the blue. And it is a beautiful blue, as you can see. Actually, let's go ahead and pass that around so everyone can get an up-close look. And the blue is color fast, come off in the wash. It is a permanent dye, and it doesn't fade. It's a good 15 years old and worn quite a lot, and you can see the rest of the tallit is changing color. That not so much.
Rabbi, and how can you guarantee that this is from the snail?
You buy it from a reputable dealer.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you buy a Rolex, you don't want to buy it from the guy who's like, hey, you want to buy a Rolex. You want to buy it from somebody who is reputable. So in fact, if you go to Tallit.com, that is the company that was made by the people who rediscovered this process and who make it still to this day in Israel. So you can be sure that what you're getting is authentic. Now, because there are, again, many counterfeiters, again, online. In fact, if you go on Amazon, you'll find, Tallit and Tallit blue and all of that. And most of those are made from a thing called Prussian blue, which is made from a copper-based dye. And it is not correct. It is not kosher. But it's a lot cheaper and a lot easier, and so it sells better.
Where's the commandment that says it has to be from that snail?
Okay. So where is the commandment that says the snail? There isn't a verse that says specifically the snail. The commandment says it has to be blue. Excuse me, the cough is still lingering from last week. The rabbis, however, say that what had been passed down as part of the oral law was that it had to be a blue of a particular shade and from a particular source in order that it would be consistent, rather than just, I like sky blue, you like navy blue, he likes dark blue. And that was why they made sure that it came from a singular source that was regulated. Plus, there are clues in how we've always thought of why blue in the first place. So Sifrei, one of the oldest layers of rabbinic teachings, Rabbi Meir said, whoever observes the mitzvah of tzitzit is considered as if he greeted the divine presence, the Shekhinah. Why? For Techelet, the color resembles the sea, and the sea resembles the sky, and the sky resembles God's holy throne. So if you can imagine, if this was a dark black blue, that wouldn't work. And if this was a pale baby blue, that wouldn't work. And plus the fact that you may notice that he sort of unnecessarily throws in that whole ocean thing, that is considered to be a nod, a hint towards the idea that this is dyed with something from the ocean. Because he could have said, it's blue, and blue represents the sky, and sky represents God's throne. Why take an ocean detour? If not to hint that the way that this blue was made came from a particular oceanic source. Other questions on the blueness? Okay. Do I have to? Well, first of all, the short answer is yes, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And by yes, I do mean for both men and women. In the conservative movement, we do believe both men and women need to wear a tallit. Whether or not you need to have the techelet is a little bit more complicated. Like I mentioned, if you look in our lobby rack, all of the talitot are white, and 99% of the people who come to the synagogue have only white tzitzit, white fringes. And that's because it has been so long that the custom has been to only use white, and many people are reluctant to overcome that inertia. So it's not a requirement to have the blue yet, but the tallit, well, it's an unusual form of a mitzvah. I'll let Rambam in Mishnah Torah try and explain it. One is only obligated to put tzitzit on a garment that he is wearing. Otherwise, he violates a positive commandment. So if you wear a four-cornered garment and you don't put tzitzit on it, then you're in trouble. But if you have a four-cornered garment and it's sitting in your closet and you're not wearing it, and it doesn't have fringes, that's not a problem. You have not broken the commandment. But as long as he is not wearing the garment, he does not have to put tzitzit on it, which means if you don't own a four-cornered garment, you're fine, right? There is no commandment to purchase a four-cornered garment. There is only a commandment to put fringes on a four-cornered garment you're wearing. But Rambam notices that loophole as well and says, well, wait a minute. Because even in his day, fashion was changing. And I'm pretty sure that all of you, if you went home and looked in your closets, you're not going to find any four-cornered garments, right? How many people here wear tunics anymore? Right? Anyone here like wear your toga?
It is a four-cornered garment. What does that mean?
It is what it says it is. It's a sheet, right? Or a cloak, if you were to wear a large cloak. Some shawls are also large enough that they could be considered a four-cornered garment. We're going to talk about the sizing of that in just a bit. And the cornerness matters. So if you have a three-cornered garment, not needed. If it has 4 or more, then it does, right? So if you, we'll talk like why scarves don't count and why handkerchiefs don't count and things like that. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So the question becomes, if our fashion has now changed, that I'm not wearing anything 4-cornered when I'm, getting dressed, then am I violating a commandment? And the strict answer is no, you're not. If you went through your whole day and even your whole life without wearing the tallit, you wouldn't be breaking a commandment. However, you would be failing to give yourself the opportunity to fulfill a commandment. So what we do, as Rambam points out, is we buy a 4-cornered garment and we wear it. So now we have the obligation and we get to do it, right? But it is our choice to do so. But it is a choice that you should make. And you'll find in every modern conservative Orthodox congregation, and even most Reform, that people will go out of their way to have a tallit, that is something that we will try to do. As Rambam points out from 1,000 years ago, even though one is not obligated to buy himself a garment that required tzitzit, a pious person should not exempt himself by refraining from wearing a garment that required tzitzit, especially while praying. Which is why you'll see that many people will wear a tallit during services, and when services are over, they'll fold it up and they'll put it away, because they're not commanded to wear a tallit every moment of every day. Now, some people choose to do so, and they will wear what is often called a tallit katan. A tallit katan is a small tallit that is sometimes worn under your clothes, like an undershirt, and you'll sometimes see the little fringes hanging out of the corners. Yeah. Some people will also wear them as an overshirt, and in many of the ultra-Orthodox communities. That is an option. It is not a requirement. Nothing wrong with wearing one, although we'll talk about the sizing in just a minute, but it is not a requirement. And if someone elects not to wear a small tallit 24/7 or during the daylight hours, they haven't failed, they haven't broken a commandment, they just didn't take that particular opportunity. So that hopefully will clear that up. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Why do we tie? All right, because we were told that we need to tie the fringes on the corner, and we were told that there needs to be a blue in it. But if you notice, as this went round, it's a little more complicated than that. Well, as the Shulchan Aruch, the law code from about 500 years ago, says, there are 5 knots in accordance with the 5 books of the Torah, and there are 4 corners, so that in every direction he faces, he will also remember, meaning this way Torah, that way Torah, this way Torah, that way Torah. It is proper to wear tzitzit on his garments, and at the very least, it is proper that one should wear tzitzit at the time of prayer. It is a fact that how we dress and how we arrange ourselves, how we costume ourselves, changes how we feel, how we are in the moment. I'm sure all of you know that if you go home and you put on your sweatpants and put on your comfy slippers, you feel very different than if you go home and you put on your tuxedo. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong, but at the right time, the right clothes put you in the right frame of mind. And a tallit is certainly something that greatly helps with the moment of prayer. It is permissible to pray without one, but it is a very different feeling. In fact, there's one day, Tisha B'Av, which is the day when we commemorate the great disasters of our history, where we don't wear a tallit in the morning prayer service. We are stripped of our garments of glory, if you will. And it feels weird, which is, of course, the point, because we're supposed to feel different on that day. How are we doing? Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about knots. Now, this particular knotting is the interpretation of Rambam's idea of how to knot when you have Tallit, when you have the blue. However, as I mentioned, most people don't use the blue. And in fact, most people use a different European style of knotting that looks a little different. You have a double knot at the top, which is between the fabric and the beginning of the fringe hang. And then you have 7 wraps where the long string is wrapped around like a little column. And then another double knot, 8 wraps, another double knot, 11 wraps, another double knot, 13 wraps, and another double knot. So you'll notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got our 5 knots that Shulchan Aruch was telling us represent the 5 books of the Torah. But 7, 8, 11, 13, it's a little weird. Where does the symbolism come from? Well, the 7 is, of course, throughout biblical poetry, is a symbol of wholeness and perfection. 7 days of creation. This is considered to be the perfect number of antiquity. 8, of course, is one more than 7. We all can do the math, but symbolically, therefore, it implies going a step beyond the physical perfection of this world to a spiritual level that even supersedes this world's wholeness. So together, 7 and 8 is 15, which happens to also be the first 2 letters of God's name when you use the Hebrew letters as numbers, right? A yud is 10, a hey is 5, 10 plus 5 is 15. So 7 and 8 equals 15. It also is one of God's names. So there's a number reason as well as a symbolism reason as well as a God's name reason. You're following this so far? I know this is a lot for just little knots. 11, our third wrap group, is the value of the last 2 letters of God's name, right? The Vav and the Hey. Excuse me. So that 6 and 5 is, of course, equal to 11. And then 13 is the value of the Hebrew word echad, which means one, because, of course, God is one. So together, the raps are saying, in this world and beyond, God is one. It's a little knot code. It's like, typing out Morse code, but in knots and raps. Make sense? Okay. The word tzitzit, the actual Hebrew word tzitzit, which means those long fringes on the corners, has a value of 600. If you add up all the letters in the Hebrew number system, then that equals 600. There are 8 threads, because there are 4 that are doubled over on each corner. And then there are 5 sets of knots, as we talked about, which makes a total of 613. 613, of course, is the same as the number of commandments. So when you look at 8 tzitzit, you are looking at the totality of all that God has asked us to do. And as we saw back when we were looking at the Vayomer paragraph, that's the whole idea. So we look at the tzitzit and we remember God's commandments. And it is sort of warped into, it is sewn into the way the fringes hang, that when we look at them, we think of God's throne, we think of God's commandments, we think of God as one. It's all implied just by a simple little tassel at the corner of our clothes. Pretty cool, right? Did you have a question, Harriet? Or
No,
doing the math?
Yes, it's really amazing. Very nice.
Yes. Okay. So how do you actually wear a tallit? Well, I'm not going to go into the tallit katan. I'll go into the tallit gadol, the large version of the tallit. But we wear a tallit in between coughs. Excuse me. Sorry. Usually when I take this out, it's exactly in the same place that I put it back in. And so I get used to unfolding it in one particular way. So when you get ready to put on a tallit, you hold it up in front of you. Many of the talitot will have the blessing written across the neck piece, what we call the atara. And that's a useful reminder. But of course, you can do the blessing from memory as well. And the blessing is as follows. You can follow along on the screen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, lahit atef batzitzit, which literally means, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, right? God makes us holy by giving us commandments, and commanded us to wrap ourselves in the fringes. Then what we'll do is you will see people kiss the corners. It's not obligatory, but it is the custom. And then you pull the tallit up, and we wrap ourselves in the tallit. And it will go like that. Usually people will just take a few moments like that, and then settle the tallit onto the shoulders. And you'll notice you've got a lot of flappy cloth around. This is not exactly comfortable unless you're, pretending to be a ghost. And so most people will fold this up onto the shoulders. Usually that happens by holding the corner with your opposite hand, grabbing it about 1/3 of the way down, and then you go up and you sort of do a flick with your thumb to put a fold in, and you settle it so that it's nicely balanced on the shoulder. And then same for the other side as well. And then you can fiddle with it for the rest of your service, because it never fits exactly right, and it gives you something to adjust. Make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. Sorry. Now, that Tallit Katan, you can, excuse me, you can also do, as I mentioned, the blessing for that is a little different. It's the same to begin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kedishan of mitzvotav v'tzivanu, al mitzvat tzitzit. That God commanded us concerning the commandment of the tzitzit. Now, do we or should we wear the Tallit Katan? And if we do, should we say a blessing? So Judaism is very careful with our blessings. We don't throw them around. When we're mentioning God and mentioning God's sovereignty, we want to make sure that we're doing it for the appropriate moment. Right? So if you're walking down the street, you don't want to just sit there going, Baruch atah. You don't want to just be like humming the blessings and singing them willy-nilly. And you don't want to say them in error. So that means that before you put on a talit, whether it be a big one or a little one, you have to make sure that it meets the criteria. It has to have at least 4 corners. The tzitzit, of course, have to be on it and tied and secure. But it also has to be large enough to cover the head and majority of the body of a child who is able to walk on his own in the marketplace without having someone else accompany him and watch him. So think of a kid that you would send, go to the marketplace and buy me some eggs, right? And here, wear this. How old of a kid would you send to the marketplace without having to go with them? And then how big of a cloth would you need to put over them for them to go and not be naked when they're walking to the market? That's the minimum measure. Now, for the large talit, obviously that's fine, right? You think maybe 5, 6-year-old in the ancient world, everyone knew each other in the village. It wasn't like going to Publix, right? You could wrap someone up in this, no problem. The kid would be swimming in it. Some of the small talits that you can buy online, the little talit katans, they're like a tank top. And they're like a tank top on me, right? And if you put that on a little kid, I'm not sure I want my kid walking to the store in that, right? So there's a debate about whether or not those small ones actually should have the blessing said over them. You can wear them, but maybe not say the blessing, just to make sure you're not saying a blessing unnecessarily, what we call a bracha levatala. So that's a bit of a debate. If you have a question about that and want to talk to me or you want to show me one, I'm happy to give you more individual information. Good?
Okay.
Good. Tied in union, right? When we talk about tefillin, sorry, let's set this to one side. We're now going to be talking about the boxes and straps. When we talk about tefillin, we're talking about a different level of intimate connection than the talit. In many ways, the talit represents us as being God's servants. In fact, in the ancient world, they have found some evidence that corded and knotted strings were used as identifiers, like a seal that would be pressed into clay, almost like a signature in the ancient world. And the idea that we would have our badge of who we served, saying, we serve the king, made a lot of sense. But it also, of course, puts us in a sort of servant role, which is absolutely appropriate. I have no problem saying God's my king and I'm a servant. And I'm not that arrogant to say I'm equal. On the other hand, the Torah and much of Jewish literature also talks about us being connected to God more personally, more intimately, not just servant and king, but even like husband and wife. And so the tefillin often will represent that aspect of our intimate bond to God. And so as Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs Rabbah, this is the Midrash on it, says, place me as a seal. Rabbi Berachia says, this refers to the recitation of the Shema, as it says, and these matters shall be on your heart, right? So it's a seal on your heart. As a seal on your arm, this refers to tefillin. And this is what it means when it says, you shall bind them upon your arm. So we love God in our heart, and as a symbol of loving God in our heart, we bind God to our body. And as you can see, this fine form of connection is going to be a lot closer than the loose talit over our body. In many ways, the tefillin is very similar to this. In the modern Western world, most people, when they get married, will put one of these on their finger. Mm-hmm. And they do so because, well, why? Why do we wear one of these? You ever thought about that? Is it just because that's what people do?
Well, it's a symbol, right?
It's a symbol, exactly.
Symbol.
Right? There's no like actual power in this, right? It's not like a legal requirement, but we want to show the world and we want to show ourselves that we are connected to somebody and somebody that has a very special place in our life that's different than any other person that's around. And that's why, we don't just give wedding rings to everyone. Hey, you're my friend, have a wedding ring. No, it's usually one-on-one. And the tefillin have a similar type of feeling, even more so when we get to the end of how we put it on. Okay, so when do we wear tefillin? This is a little trickier, This is a little trickier than the Tallit. Right, so Shulchan Aruch, again, taken from about 500 years ago, good law code summary. It is a mitzvah to have the tefillin on all day. But because the body needs to be clean, meaning you can't wear these in the bathroom, right? You can't wear these when you've got, bodily problems, which tefillin does not allow one to do. And one is not allowed to distract his mind from them, meaning you don't wear tefillin and read the sports page, right? You don't wear tefillin and do your business work. You don't wear tefillin and farm in the field, right? When you wear tefillin, you need to be focused on tefillin thoughts. That means to say on prayer, on study, on engaging with God. And when you're doing other stuff, which is fine, right? You gotta, work in the field. You don't maybe have to read the sports page, but it's certainly allowed. Your mind is distracted from those higher thoughts. And if your mind is distracted, you shouldn't be wearing tefillin. These are not meant to be ornaments. They are meant to be a symbol of that focus. And therefore, we don't wear them when we are distracted. And as he points out, people are not able to be careful, and our minds wander. So we do not put them on all day. Nevertheless, everyone needs to be careful with them. So we put them on during the reciting of the Shema and prayer, meaning during the Shema and the Amidah, the main tefillah, the main prayer of our morning service. We at least know we need to be concentrating for that. And if we can concentrate for that, we can wear the tefillin during that time, right? We'll make it, right? I may not be able to do it for 5 hours, but I can at least do it for that window. And that's why we wear tefillin during the morning service. Make sense? But technically, yes, a person can wear tefillin longer. And there are some people that have a custom of they wear them for the morning service and they finish the service and they immediately start studying. And that way they can stretch out that concentration, that connection time a little bit longer. But eventually they're going to need breakfast. Eventually they're going to need the bathroom or a shower. And then it has to come off. Or eventually they just have to go to work. And that means that they can't continue to wear it longer than that. We good? Okay. So what is actually in the tefillin? This is a question that was brought up before, and I am going to show you. This is an old set of tefillin that was given to me like this, that inside you'll see there is a scroll. Well, actually there is a difference. In the head tefillin, excuse me, there are 5 scrolls, or 4 scrolls, excuse me, and in the arm tefillin there is 1 scroll. They each have the same writing, but on the head one, it's divided into 4 separate scrolls. And on the arm one, it is put into 1 scroll. This is a form of compromise to make sure that we've got it covered at least one way. And if you take out the scroll, let me find the opening, there we go. There. You can see the 4 different passages that are done. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring this around. I'm not going to just pass it around because it will quickly re-roll because it's rolled very tightly. And that is all hand done. You can have machines doing this. In fact, usually what you'll have is a stoker who will start with doing a mezuzah, and then they'll graduate from mezuzah to tefillin, because they have to be even more careful and precise to get them into the space needed to roll it up and put them into the box. It's incredibly good handwriting for such a. Well, they do score the parchment so that they can keep it straight. They put like a little dent in the parchment to make sure that they can hang the letters evenly. Because otherwise I know when I write it's like.
I know.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
How long does it
And-
take?
It depends on the writer. I'm not sure what the average time of
I know, Torah is a year.
a Torah roughly is about a year.
Is
This
this
is a
a
lot
day?
shorter than that.
Yeah. They,
I think certainly a good sofer who knows what they're doing could easily do that in a day. But yes, it does take preparation, and the better you are, the smaller you get, which is why it's kind of funny. The more expensive tefillin are usually smaller tefillin, because the larger tefillin means the scribe couldn't shrink the letters enough. So as you get more and more skilled, you're able to shrink your handwriting down until you're doing the microlithography kind of stuff. Yeah, it's very cool. It's very cool. Now, the four different passages, Exodus 13, 1 to 10, Exodus 13, 11 to 16, Deuteronomy 6, 4 to 9, and Deuteronomy 11, 13 to 1, you can look up, but they all represent our connection to God and God's connection to us. And especially they also, of course, include the mention that we already had of binding it to ourselves. Excuse me. How are we doing?
I have a question.
Yes.
But it was with the French.
Yes.
I have seen in Jerusalem some Orthodox
Mhm.
that they have small,
Mhm.
and there's one that almost go to the floor. Why is that?
So the fringe, I don't know if you'll be able to see, there is one long string, wrapping string. That's the one that we use to wrap. And that one can end up very long. The practical thing to do is once you have finished and you know how far you've gone, is you cut off the extra. That's perfectly fine. I would imagine, I haven't seen that particular group, I would imagine that group enjoys having longer for whatever reason. But there's no need for having one of the threads be super long. Yeah, and really anything that you do that makes it harder to wear is not recommended. The whole point is you should feel comfortable and glad to wear this so that you appreciate and enjoy the reminder that it's giving you, not that it's annoying. And also, we're not really meant to show off. We're not supposed to be like flourishing our fringes and whipping them back and forth to show everyone, look how long my fringes are, because you see that the counting is 613 for all of us, right? If you make a longer fringe, you don't get extra points. It's the same Torah for everyone. So I'm not seeing that particular custom of having to be super, super long. I've seen plenty of people who will keep it short because then it's much more practical. If they are, especially if they're like construction workers or farmers and people who are out in the field, they don't want to be dragging them through the dirt. Then they'll have the tzitzit be very tight and short.
And I have seen the Tallit
Mhm.
that they wear it on under the pants or something. That
Well, under
you
the
don't-
shirt.
That you don't see the string.
Yeah, you can tuck them inside as well, right? So sometimes the fringes will go all the way down into the inside of the pant legs, and that's fine too. Yep. Okay. Women in tefillin. This is a question that comes up all the time, and I'm going to go ahead and take care of it now, right? So Eruvin from the Talmud. This Tana taught in a Braita, Michal bat Kushi wore tefillin, and the sages did not protest. Now, anytime you see the sages did not protest, it means somebody did something and it was okay. So Michal is, of course, a woman. And the idea here is that it is perfectly permissible for a woman to wear tefillin. A woman was not obligated to wear tefillin before the modern times. As we talked a little bit before, and I will do a more extensive discussion about the role of women in antiquity and how that has changed to the modern world. In the ancient world, a woman was not 100% her own boss, right? I mean, obviously she had her own personality. She was not a slave. She was not bought. She wasn't sold. But economically, she was tied to whoever owned the land that she was eating from, right? And that land was owned only by men, almost in all cases, because the land was divided by the tribes, and what tribe you were in depended on who your father was. And therefore, to keep the tribes balanced and equal and fair and not let one tribe, swallow up another one, they had to make sure that everyone's land stayed in the same family. And that meant it went down father, son, father, son, father, son. And that meant that for a woman, when she got married, she would leave her father's land and move to her husband's land. And since that was pretty much how 95% of the people lived on the land, there weren't a lot of merchants, there weren't a lot of people who lived in cities, your whole life you had to be responsible for what the owner of the land wanted to do. So you imagine you're a woman and you wake up in the morning and it's time for prayers, but your husband says, I need you to go feed the chickens. In the ancient world, the rabbi said, if we tell the woman she has to do the prayers the same way the man has to do the prayers, in the house there's going to be a fight every morning. Because the husband's going to say chickens and she's going to say prayers, and you're never going to have a happy marriage. So instead, we'll say to the woman, you can do all of this, but you don't have to. So therefore, if your husband is telling you to do something, you can put it on hold, take care of that, make peace, and then come back and finish up. But that meant that the level of obligation was less, but the permission was the same. A woman was allowed to, she just didn't have to in the ancient world. Now, fast forward 2,000 years, in the modern world, women are no longer tied economically to a piece of land. They're not tied to the person who owns the land. In fact, most women own their own land, or at least own it in co-partnership with their husbands. And so therefore, women don't have the excuse anymore of, I don't have the obligation. Because now you are freer, and with freedom comes responsibility. So welcome to liberation. Here are your tefillin. It's once you take that step into saying I am independent, then you have the obligations of an independent man, and that includes having to wear tefillin. So the conservative movement says women ought to be wearing tefillin. They ought to be wearing a tallit. As Rabbi Golinkin, who is one of the really great rabbis of the conservative movement in Israel, wrote, there is ample halakhic justification for allowing women to wear tefillin. The overwhelming halakhic evidence teaches us that women may wear tefillin, like Michal Bat Shaul, and some righteous women in France, Italy, Eastern Europe, and Israel, and we do not protest. This is what has been normal for a very long time. But now it should be not just not protested, it should be encouraged. Any questions on that regarding women? Okay. So how do we wear tefillin? Well, we wear tefillin by putting one on the arm and, and one on the head. And I will demonstrate in just a second. But before I demonstrate, I want to walk you through the way the blessings work. So for the arm tefillin, we get everything ready, and then just before we tighten, we say the blessing, because we always say a blessing before the action, so that we are focused while we do the action. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehaniach tefillin, which means you're commanding us to wear the tefillin. When we do the head, again, we get it ready, and then we say the same beginning, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al mitzvat tefillin, which means commanded us concerning the commandment of the tefillin, the mitzvah of wearing tefillin, which you'll notice is also similar to the same structure that we had when we talked about the Tallit Katan, the small Tallit. Okay. And then when we are finished with all of the arm wrapping, we finish up with the hand, which I will demonstrate. And when we get to the very tips of our fingers, we actually quote this passage from Hosea, where we say, I will betroth you to me forever. I betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, and kindness and mercy. I betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. It's like putting on 3 wedding rings when you're putting these 3 bands of the strap around your finger. And it's a very moving moment each morning when we do this. I should point out we don't wear tefillin on Shabbat, because tefillin are considered to be a sign, a symbol of our connection to God, or our brit, our covenant. And Shabbat is also a connection, a symbol of that connection, which is what we say in Vishamru, right? Ot hi, it is a symbol of the covenant, Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, between me and the children of Israel. And if you use 2 symbols, it makes it look like one of the symbols is not good enough, right? So it'd be like saying I wear my wedding ring and I carry around my wedding certificate. Are you saying the ring isn't enough of a symbol? This isn't enough of a reminder, right? So when it's Shabbat, we don't need a double symbol, and so we don't wear tefillin on Shabbat. But if you come to Sunday morning minyan, then you'll see tefillin being worn. And if you go, of course, to the minyan at the JCC, 7:45, that's a.m., you'll see people wearing tefillin as well. We good? Okay. So let's talk about how we do this. We've got plenty of time to finish this up. Good. I think I got the timing better this year. All right. Now there's a slight difference between the two. And you'll know that you're dealing with the arm tefillin, the box, because of it is completely smooth. The head box, and I'll show you these more later if you'd like, you'll see has a shin on each side, and it's got 4 lines to remind you that inside there are 4 chambers that have the 4 different scrolls. All right, so even from the outside, you don't have to pry it open and look because you don't want to do that because it's sewn together. You can tell which is which. But of course, you can also tell by looking at the straps because there will be a slip knot, a loop that adjusts for the arm, whereas for the head tefillin, it is a fixed knot, right? Because your arm raises and closes and moves. You need a little bit more adjustment there. Your head doesn't grow. Your head is pretty much, and once it's done growing, you finish growing, you're good. All right, so usually once you begin the process of putting on tefillin, the only thing we say are the blessings. But for instruction purposes, obviously I'm going to keep interrupting the process to explain over and what we're doing. So normally, if you see someone putting on tefillin, it's not a good time to come up and say, "Hey, how you doing? What's going on? Haven't seen," because they're shut down. They're only focused on this. But for this, pretend like I'm silent, but I'm still talking. Good? Good. Okay, so it gets put on a bit like a bracelet. I should point out, I always take off my watch. It's not required to take off a watch, but I find it more comfortable and easier. I know a lot of people don't wear watches anymore. You put it like a bracelet with the house part hanging down. Right, so the strap is at the top of the arm, and the bayit, it's called, a house, is the box is hanging below it, and you put it so that it's about, as you can see, either 2 inches or so from where your arm flexes, so that you're not going to be bumping it. It can be a little bit more, and it should be on your non-writing arm. So I'm right-handed when I write, so I put it on my left arm. Right, you put it on your weaker arm. And weaker is decided by which one you normally write. Make sense? Okay. It goes like, you can see, about on the bicep, not that I've got much of one, and it should be leaning in, right, towards the heart, towards the body, right? You don't want it to be straight up and down like you're doing a Popeye, arm. It's supposed to be angled a little bit towards you. You get it ready, you make sure the box and the knot are touching here, and then this is the point where we would say the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehaniach tefillin. Right, lehaniach tefillin. And then we go under, around, and then I'm going to push the button up. There we are. Lehaniach tefillin. And once we come back around, we are now going to make 7 loops down the forearm. Remember, we talked before about 7 loops on the first strand of the Tallit, and this is a symbol of perfection. Another way to think of it is the patriarchs and matriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, and that comes down. You want this to be fairly snug. You're going to get a little bit of skin bulging. That keeps it from getting all loose and floppy and very uncomfortable. So it's better to go ahead and just make that tight. When you get down to here, you just take the extra down the middle of the palm. I should point out, there are numerous varieties of how to do the rest of the wrap, right? Starting already, the Sephardim will go this way with their wraps rather than that way. But the hand in particular, there's great diversity in different communities throughout Europe and throughout the world of how to take care of the rest of the hand. I will show you what is the most common European method that I have been exposed to. But if you see someone doing it a little different, it's okay. There's lots of variety there. Okay, well, this is in pause mode. We finish off the head. That's because the rest of this is not actually part of the mitzvah, right? If you only went like this, you'd be fine. And therefore, we don't want to put off the second half of the mitzvah, which is doing the head. So we take and we make sure that it is ready. And we get it so that the back part is going at that dent at the base of your skull where your spine hits your head, where your neck is meeting. It's the occipital socket or something like that. And you want the top to be coming up along above your ears. And then you want the bite to be at your hairline, between your hairline and the crown of your head. Right? Sometimes you'll see people wearing their tefillin like this. Not right, right? Your tefillin should be pointing up at the sky, not straight ahead. You're not a unicorn, right? You're not a rhinoceros.
Oh, okay.
Now, if your hair has disappeared or retreated a little bit, you can still put your tefillin where your hair used to be. That's okay. So bald people are still allowed to wear tefillin. It's just the guideline should be where your hairline was or where your hairline is. So you get it close to being right, and then we say the blessing again before we make it perfect. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu al mitzvat tefillin. Let me make sure it's tight, and we pull the straps around, and then you take out your phone and you make sure that it's centered. Well, that's why the phones always have that mirror, right? That God gave us these to check our tefillin. And, because it's a weekday when I'm wearing tefillin, I will have my phone. On Shabbat, I don't have my phone, so I can't wear tefillin.
Perfect.
And then we say, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. This last line here is we're being careful, because when we do the second blessing for the head, it might not be necessary. There's a very long debate in Judaism of whether we need to say one blessing for both or whether we say one blessing for each. And so we say one blessing for each, but we add this last line, which is what you'll say if you've ever said a blessing that was by mistake. So for example, imagine you're getting ready to eat an apple, and you would normally say, of course, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri ha'etz, the one who made the fruit of the tree. But before you actually say that, you say borei peri ha'adama, which is the one who made the fruit of the ground. And they're like, wrong blessing. Well, you can add Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed, which means literally blessed is his glorious name of his sovereignty for all time. And that basically says what I just said wasn't a blessing, it was just me celebrating God. And then you go back and say the correct blessing. So it's a way of turning a blessing into a general praise rather than a blessing. And that way we don't have the bracha levatala, the wasted blessing issue that we talked about before. So this is our way of covering ourselves, just to make sure in case we don't need that second blessing, we haven't actually wasted it.
I'm listening to you, what you're saying, that's not the same after the Shema? That's the thing we say quietly.
It is exactly the same phrase that we say quietly to ourselves after the Shema, except on Yom Kippur when we do say it out loud. Exactly, because as a reminder of the temple service in the ancient world. Very, very good ears. Okay, and then you make sure the straps are hanging in front, black side facing out. Sometimes they may twist, that's okay. We still got our hand to deal with, right? So now we unwrap that extra that we had, and so we've got a band coming here, and then we go, let's see if I can make my hand look like the TV. So we go up around the middle finger, and we make a loop near the top, right? And that's where we would say our first line, V'rastifli leolam. And then we make a loop below the knuckle, and that's where we would say V'aristi li b'tzedek u'mishpat v'chesed v'rachamim. And then we make another loop below that, and that's where we would say V'aristi li be'emunah v'yadat et Adonai. And then we come back up to the ring finger, back down the center of the palm, and around. And this depends on your hand, how much extra you get. And you can trim the strap. If you buy tefillin, the strap comes standard length, and if you end up with it being super thick, you can cut off the extra because your arm is not going to inflate like Schwarzenegger. And if it does, you can buy new straps. And then you would just tuck it in underneath. You'll notice that with the 3 straps here, it looks like a shin. With the 2 here and the top bar looking this way, it looks like a Tallit. And the single line here looks like a Yud, which spells Shaddai, which is one of the other names for God. And when you've now finished it at this point, you're done. This is wearing tefillin. And then you would wear this, you would go through your prayers and such, and then when you're done, you would do it in the exact opposite. So you would take the hand off first, back to the straps in the middle. You would then take the head off, and you would wrap this up neatly. I'll do that after class. And then you finish taking off the rest of the arm. So you do everything in exactly the opposite order that you first put it on. Including, of course, I would be wearing a Tallit already as well. And then the Tallit would come off last. Good? Okay.
If the Tallit is coming last, then how are you gonna put the tefillin in there?
Well, so it's a very good question. First of all, I should point out that when you're wearing tefillin, you can't have anything between the tefillin and your body. So, for example, you'll notice I have my sleeve up, right? I can't put my tefillin on the outside. It has to be against me. When I put it on my head, it has to be against me. This is a good reason why most Jewish men don't bother wearing a toupee, right? Because if you wear a toupee, then that's something that's between you and the tefillin. And you can't, of course, wear a hat between you. And you'll notice my kippah is inside the loop, not blocking the strap from my head. When I was talking about putting on the Tallit, we bring it up and we go like that, but only for a minute. And then it comes down here. Now, there are some people that have a tradition, once they've put on the rest of the tefillin, that they'll put their Tallit up and over, and it's resting on top of the tefillin. And then when they're going to take off the tefillin, they'll just put it down on their shoulders. Okay, one last page. This is a bit of a reminder of what we should be aiming for while we are wearing the Tallit and while we are wearing the tefillin. Again, comes from Rambam because he was brilliant. It's hard to say it better than him. If the sage, meaning somebody who is trying to learn and be knowledgeable and good at Judaism, is exacting with himself in his speech, is calm with creatures and his ways is pleasant with them, and he greets them with a pleasant countenance and is insulted by them, but does not insult them, honors them, even those who belittle him, and does business in good faith, and does not enjoin in the frequent hospitality of the ignorant and their gatherings, and is not constantly seen. Right? So this is his list of what makes a good person. Right? You're happy, you're calm, you're patient, you're polite to other people, you're friendly, you smile, and if people are mean to you, you're not right back to them. Right? That should be your demeanor, your personality. That should be the goal. And when you do business, you should be honest, and you should be fair, and you should be trustworthy. Excuse me, don't need that. And you shouldn't hang around with the ignorant, meaning don't hang out with lowlifes. Don't hang out with people that aren't good people. If you hang out with them, even if you're a good person, it rubs off, and that's you gotta be careful with your company. And instead of hanging out with the idiots and the bad people, you are involved in the Torah, and you are wrapped in the fringes, in the tzitzit, and you are crowned by the tefillin, and you comport, you handle yourself in all his actions beyond the letter of the law, meaning that
I need to take a picture of this. This is so good.
Right, so beyond the letter of the law means that, yes, God asked us to behave like this, but behaving like this can create a mediocre person, right? Sometimes you need to go even more, right? So if someone says, hey, can you help me, move because I've got a thing, and you say, sure, and you show up and you help them a little bit. That's nice, great, you're a good neighbor. On the other hand, if you help them move and you help them settle in and they have trouble and you help them get their utilities hooked up and you're making an extra trip to Home Depot for them, that's going beyond the letter, right? No one's requiring you to do that. God didn't tell you had to do that, but you're willing to go extra, to go further. Then you are really stretching yourself spiritually. And this is a very important and if he also does not distance himself greatly and does not become strange, right? Some people who are trying very hard to be spiritual, who are trying very hard to be religious, they can end up, I don't want to hang out with anyone. I don't want to be around anyone else that's not as holy as I am. And they can start having very unusual habits and very unusual behavior, and people begin looking at them like they're a little, yeah. That's also wrong, right? You don't want to hang out with the fools, but you also don't want to become a mockery of what being religious is, right? Rambam is very much about the balanced middle path. Then, if you get all this right, everyone will praise him and love him and desire his actions. Behold, such a one has sanctified the Lord. This is what we call Kiddush Hashem. This is what it means to bring honor to God by how you live your life. If people look at you and they say, wow, look at that person. They are so connected to God, and they are so kind, and they are so pleasant, and they are so helpful, and that you can see that they care about their faith, their tradition, and their community, and other people. That shows me that God is pretty amazing, because look at the effect God has had on that person. That's the goal. And Tallit and Tefillin, these are part of what hopefully will keep us focused in that direction. Good? Good. Next week, Passover discussion.
Awesome.
Yeah.